Welcome back to another video. In this video we are going to have a look at data type casting. Type casting, or another name for it, is type conversion, which means converting something from one data type to another data type. And type casting can be done in two ways. One is implicit and the other one is explicit. The implicit way is performed automatically by Python without any user intervention, where the explicit way can be done manually by the user using casting functions. And some common use cases for typecasting include ensuring consistent data types for mathematical operations, converting user input from strings to integers or floats, and handling data from APIs or files that require conversions. So these are some common use cases. Now here's an example of an implicit typecasting where Python automatically promotes smaller data types to larger data types when needed. For example, adding an integer to a float will automatically convert the integer to a float. So we have int underscore number equals 5, and then we have float underscore number equals 3.2. And then we store everything in a variable called result. Result equals int underscore number plus float underscore number. Here we are adding an integer to a float. So the integer 5 is implicitly casted to a float. So data type casting is implicitly applied to the integer number 5. And then we can see the result. The output is 8.2. And to now prove this is a float, we can use the type function. So this will tell us the data type, and the output of the type function is a class float. So this is an implicit example. Now looking at an example of explicit typecasting. In explicit typecasting, you can manually use the following functions, which are int converts a value to an integer, float converts a value to a float, string str, which converts a value to a string, bool converts a value to a boolean, and then there's list, tuple, and set, which converts a value to a list, tuple, or a set respectively. Now I have some examples. So the first example, we have x equals 1, y equals underscore 2.5. And to convert x to a floating point type, because currently it's an integer, we can store it in a variable called x underscore float. And then we can use our float function, the second one in the list. So float, and then we will specify x in the parenthesis. And now when we print x underscore float, this will convert x into a float. And then we can use a type function to prove it's been converted into a float. So this example we will have a look at in PyCharm amongst the other two examples. The next example, we convert the float y to an integer. So we're using the int function here. And the third example, we are converting the integer x and the float y to type strings. So we're using the function str to convert them. Let's have a look at these three examples in PyCharm and how we confirm they have in fact changed to the correct data types. So if I do x equals 1 and y equals 2.5, and then we can print x and y. However, if we use the type function to confirm the data types, and now if we run the file, it will confirm x is a type of int for integer and y is a float. Now to convert x and y to a string type, we can store them in the variables x underscore string and y underscore string equals str. So we are using the data type casting function str followed by x and str again followed by y to convert them into strings. And now we can print x underscore string and y underscore string to the screen. And let's follow this up using the functions to identify the data types again. So in the previous time they were identified as integers and floats. But if we run the file again, this time we can see it's still printed 1 and 2.5 as per the first two print statements, and the second two print statements identify the new types, so they have changed from int to float to string and string. And it's a similar process for the other examples as well. So if we wanted to convert x to a floating point type, we will store it in x underscore float equals, and then we will use the casting type of float. Now we can print type and inside parenthesis again x underscore float. So if we run the file, we can see x has been converted to a float, but in the original instance x was an integer type int. So it's now been converted into a float. And with y we can already see it's a float because it's 2.5. So to convert y to an integer type, we can do the same. So we can see originally y was a float. Now we have converted it to a type int, which now we can see over here it's been converted to a type int. I have a couple of example use cases. Example 1 is converting user age from string to integer. So when gathering age input from a user, it's often entered as a string. And here is how to convert it to an integer for further calculations. So I've got user underscore age equals input, and then we ask the user for their age. And then on the second line, we will store it in age in 5 years, and then we will use the typecasting function int, specify user age in there plus 5, which will convert it to an integer. And then when we print it, in 5 years, you'll be age in 5 years, years old. And of course, on the second line, we can see age in 5 years equals the user age, which has been converted to an integer plus 5. And I guess if we go back to PyCharm and paste the code in just to see the output, we can see it's asking us for our age. And over here, we can see it confirms in 5 years, you'll be 30 years old. So it has indeed converted it to an integer type and added the int type values together. Example 2 is counting items in a list as a string. So imagine counting items in a list, then converting the count to a string to display it with a message. So items equal apple, banana and orange. And then the second line we will store it in a variable called item underscore count. This time we'll use the length function to count the items, which effectively gets the number of items. And then we will print you have plus, and this is where we're using the str function to convert it back to a string. And this of course was stored in item underscore count. And then we are using the plus to concatenate another string, items in your basket. And finally, the output should be you have 3 items in your basket. And again, we can run this in PyCharm just to confirm it runs. So it's converted the item count to a string and then concatenated it with another string. And that's the end of this video. That's a high level overview of data type casting.